The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Emily Carter's penthouse, casting a warm glow on the marble floors and modern art that adorned the walls. The sound of her alarm, a gentle piano melody, was almost drowned out by the buzz of her phone on the nightstand. With a groan, Emily reached out, silencing the incessant notifications. Dozens of messages lit up the screen. Party invites, spa appointments, and photos from last night's gala, where she had been photographed in yet another couture gown. Emily stretched languidly, her silk pajamas sliding effortlessly against the 1,000 thread count sheets. Her walk-in closet awaited, a shrine to high fashion, with rows of designer heels and racks of bespoke dresses. Yet, as she stood in front of it, scanning the options, she felt nothing. No excitement, no joy, just a hollow sense of routine. "Miss Emily, breakfast is served," called her personal assistant Mary through the intercom. Emily sighed, heading downstairs to the sprawling dining room where a meticulously prepared breakfast awaited her. Avocado toast with truffle oil, fresh-pressed green juice, and an assortment of exotic fruits. She barely touched the food, scrolling aimlessly through her phone. Her father's chair at the head of the table sat empty, as it always did. Richard Carter, the tech tycoon, was too busy conquering the corporate world to bother with family meals. "Any news from my father?" Emily asked Mary, who stood dutifully nearby. "He called early this morning, miss. He'll be in Zurich for the next few days. Something urgent came up," Mary replied, her tone apologetic. Emily nodded, masking her disappointment. She had grown accustomed to his absence, though it still stung. The days stretched ahead of her, an endless void to be filled with shopping, spa treatments, and superficial encounters with so-called friends. That evening, over a lavish dinner at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, her world began to shift. Richard Carter, rarely one for confrontation, had requested her presence, a move Emily knew spelled trouble. She arrived fashionably late, dressed to the nines, her entrance turning heads. Her father, however, barely glanced up from his tablet. "Emily," he began, setting the device down. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" Emily shrugged, leaning back in her chair. "If this is about the tabloids, they exaggerate everything. Besides, isn't all press good press?" "Not when it tarnishes the Carter name," Richard snapped. "Your antics have consequences. The paparazzi caught you stumbling out of a club at 3 a.m. That's not the image we want for our family or our business." "And what image is that?" "Cold, calculating, and lifeless," Emily shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sorry I don't fit into your perfect little mold, Dad." The tension between them crackled. Richard's face hardened, his patience visibly thinning. "Enough. You've been coasting through life, without a shred of responsibility or self-awareness. That ends now." Emily smirked, crossing her arms. "Oh, and what are you going to do? Cut off my credit cards?" "No," Richard replied evenly, his tone dangerously calm. "You're going to Montana." "Montana?" Emily laughed, incredulous. "What on earth is in Montana?" "The farm. Your mother's farm," Richard said, his expression softening briefly at the mention of her. "It's time you learn what hard work and humility mean. You leave tomorrow." The laughter died in Emily's throat. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I am," Richard said firmly. "Pack light. You won't need your couture dresses where you're going." Emily stormed out of the restaurant, anger bubbling beneath her composed exterior. Yet, as the car sped through the city streets, she felt a flicker of something else. Fear, perhaps, or maybe a spark of curiosity about what lay ahead. The wheels of the town car skidded slightly as it pulled onto the dirt road leading to the Carter family's farm in rural Montana. Dust clouds rose in the wake of the vehicle, a stark contrast to the polished asphalt streets Emily Carter was accustomed to in New York. She peered out the tinted window, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping impatiently against her phone. No signal. Great. Miss Emily, we're almost there, the driver announced, his voice tinged with sympathy as he navigated the bumpy terrain. Emily didn't respond. Her stomach churned as she caught sight of the sprawling expanse of land ahead. Fields stretched out endlessly, bordered by worn fences and patches of wildflowers. In the distance stood a large, weathered farmhouse, its white paint peeling under the relentless sun. Next to it was a barn, equally aged, its roof partially rusted. When the car came to a stop, Emily stepped out hesitantly, her designer heels sinking into the gravel driveway. The air smelled of earth and hay, an unfamiliar blend that immediately made her wrinkle her nose. "Welcome to the farm," said a woman, approaching from the porch. She was in her 60s, with gray hair tied into a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Dressed in jeans and a plaid shirt, she exuded a no-nonsense energy that made Emily instinctively straighten her posture. "You must be Martha Peterson," Emily said, forcing a polite smile. "That's right," Martha replied, looking her up and down. "And you must be Richard's daughter. You're late." Emily bristled. "There was traffic." "Traffic? Out here?" Martha chuckled dryly. "Right. Well, let's get you settled. You've got work to do tomorrow." Emily blinked. "Work? I thought I was just staying here to observe." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you'll be observing all right, while you clean, plant, and feed the animals. Let's go." Martha led Emily inside the farmhouse, the scent of wood and aged fabric greeting her as they entered. The floors creaked underfoot, and the walls were adorned with black and white photos of the farm through the decades. The contrast to Emily's sleek penthouse couldn't have been more jarring. "This will be your room," Martha said, pushing open the door to a small, modestly furnished space. A twin bed with a patchwork quilt, a wooden dresser, and a single lamp made up the entirety of the decor. Emily stared in disbelief. "You're joking, right? Where's the ensuite bathroom?" "Down the hall," Martha replied, unfazed. "And you'll share it with the rest of us." Emily opened her mouth to protest, but the words died as she caught Martha's expression, a look that said arguing would be pointless. "Fine," Emily muttered, dragging her suitcase inside. As she unpacked, the absurdity of her situation hit her. How had it come to this? From couture gowns to flannel pajamas, from cocktail parties to whatever this was. The next morning, Emily's alarm clock was not the soothing piano melody she was used to, but the loud crowing of a rooster. Groggy and disoriented, she stumbled out of bed and into the kitchen, where Martha was already bustling about. "Good morning," Martha said briskly. "Hope you're ready. Joe's waiting for you outside." "Joe?" Emily asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "The farmhand," Martha explained. "He'll show you the ropes." Emily stepped outside to find a man leaning casually against the barn. Joe Walker looked to be in his mid-30s, with a sturdy build and sun-weathered skin. His dark eyes held a hint of amusement as he took in Emily's appearance. Designer jeans, pristine sneakers, and an annoyed expression. "You must be the boss's daughter," he said, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "And you must be the farmhand," Emily shot back. "Fair enough," Joe replied, straightening up. "Follow me. Let's see what you're made of." The day proved to be a series of disasters. Emily tripped over a hose while attempting to water the garden, spilling muddy water all over herself. Later, she struggled to carry a bale of hay nearly toppling over under its weight. Maybe start with something lighter, Joe suggested, clearly holding back laughter. By midday, Emily was covered in dirt and sweat, her patience worn thin. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, throwing her gloves to the ground. "You're not in Manhattan anymore, Princess," Joe said, his tone sharper now. "Out here, things don't get handed to you on a silver platter. You work, or you don't eat." Emily glared at him, but picked up her gloves, determined not to let him see her quit. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily returned to the house, utterly exhausted. Dinner was a simple affair, stew and homemade bread, prepared by Martha. Despite her hunger, Emily barely tasted it, too drained from the day's events. Before heading to bed, she explored her room further and noticed an old chest tucked into the corner. Curiosity piqued. She tried to open it, but found it locked. She made a mental note to ask Martha about it later, though a part of her wondered if it was worth the effort. As Emily lay in bed that night, the sounds of the countryside, crickets, rustling leaves, distant animal calls, lulled her into an uneasy sleep. This wasn't the life she wanted, but for now, it was the one she had. Little did she know, the chest in the corner and the fields outside held answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask yet. The golden morning sunlight spilled through the thin curtains of Emily's room, illuminating the modest furnishings. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. It had been 2 days since she arrived at the farm, and the lack of signal was beginning to feel like a form of punishment all on its own. Her thumbs hovered over the screen, futilely refreshing her social media apps. "No connection," she muttered, tossing the phone onto the bed. It landed with a thud, much like her spirits. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Martha was busy making plans for the day, while Emily toyed with her fork, barely touching her eggs. Her mind wandered to the life she had left behind in New York, the familiar chaos of the city, and the friends she used to surround herself with, particularly Samantha Price, her closest confidant, or so she thought. "Samantha must be worried about me," Emily mused aloud, earning a skeptical glance from Martha. "Maybe," Martha said curtly, "but friends who care usually find ways to show it, even from a distance." Emily frowned but said nothing, the words sticking uncomfortably in her mind. The day's tasks involved helping Joe clear debris from the barn after last night's windstorm. It was monotonous work, and Emily found her thoughts drifting to her old life. Samantha had been her partner in crime since their prep school days: shopping trips, exclusive parties, late-night confessions over expensive wine. Yet the longer Emily spent away from the city, the more she questioned the authenticity of those bonds. "Mind on something else?" Joe's voice interrupted her thoughts. He stood leaning against a shovel, his sharp eyes studying her. "No," Emily said quickly, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. Joe smirked, unconvinced. "Suit yourself, a city girl. Just don't let those distractions get in the way of the work." That evening, after another exhausting day, Emily finally received a flicker of connection on her phone. A flood of notifications poured in, but one message from Samantha caught her attention. "Hey babe, missing you tons. Can't wait for you to come back so we can plan your big return party. Call me soon." Emily stared at the text, her instincts tingling. Something about it felt off, forced, almost rehearsed. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been growing since she left. Deciding to act on her suspicion, Emily dialed the number of Henry Evans, her lawyer. "Emily," Henry's familiar voice answered after a few rings. "What's going on? Is everything all right?" "I'm fine," Emily replied, though her tone betrayed her unease. "I need you to look into something for me, discreetly." The next day, while Martha assigned her to organize the storage shed, Emily found herself thinking about Samantha. Flashbacks of their friendship flickered through her mind. Lavish trips to Paris, inside jokes, promises of loyalty. But even in those memories, cracks began to show. Had she been blind to Samantha's opportunistic tendencies all this time? A week later, Henry called with news. Emily, eager for answers, arranged to meet him at a small cafe in town, one of the few places where she could blend in without drawing attention. Sitting in a corner booth, Henry placed a folder on the table between them. His expression was serious, almost pitying. "Emily," he began cautiously, "you were right to be suspicious." Emily's chest tightened. "What did you find?" Henry hesitated before opening the folder, revealing printed messages, financial records, and photos. "Samantha has been conspiring with a group of individuals to gain access to your trust fund. This isn't recent. It's been going on for at least 2 years." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. She flipped through the evidence, her hands trembling. Messages between Samantha and unknown associates detailed schemes, including falsified documents and manipulative plans to isolate Emily. She was going to betray me," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Henry nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry, Emily, but this is concrete. There's no doubt about her intentions." Emily returned to the farm that evening, her mind spinning with betrayal and anger. The sprawling fields that had felt suffocating just days ago now seemed like a sanctuary, a place where she could process the truth. She couldn't believe that Samantha, someone she had trusted implicitly, could be so cold and calculated. "What's eating you?" Martha asked, as Emily silently picked at her dinner. "Nothing," Emily replied, though her tone was clipped. Martha narrowed her eyes but didn't push. Instead, she offered, "Sometimes facing hard truths is the only way to move forward." That night, Emily sat in her room, staring at the locked chest she had noticed earlier. Her fingers traced its edges, wondering what secrets it held. She felt an odd connection to the chest, as though it mirrored her own situation. A shell of wealth and protection, yet hiding something vulnerable inside. Grabbing a flashlight, she set out to find Martha. "What's in the chest in my room?" Emily asked directly. Martha glanced at her, then sighed. "It belonged to your mother. She left it here before she passed. No one's touched it since." "Do you have the key?" Emily pressed. "It's not my place to open it," Martha said firmly. "If you're meant to, you'll find a way." As Emily returned to her room, her thoughts returned to Samantha's betrayal. She felt a surge of determination she hadn't known before. Betrayal might have shaken her, but it wouldn't break her. Slowly, the walls she had built to shield herself from vulnerability began to crack, and beneath them, a stronger version of herself was emerging. The locked chest loomed in the corner, a silent reminder that the answers she sought, about her mother, her past, and even herself, might still be waiting to be uncovered. The sound of the rooster crowing at dawn had become Emily's unwelcome alarm clock. She groaned, rolling over and burying her face in the pillow. The crisp, cool air of Montana mornings filled the room, so different from the climate-controlled cocoon of her New York penthouse. But as much as she resisted, Emily knew she couldn't escape the day ahead. Her first stop, as always, was the kitchen. Martha was already there, bustling about with her characteristic efficiency. "Good morning, sunshine," Martha said with a faint smirk. "Breakfast is on the table. Eat up. Long day ahead." Emily sat down to a plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. It wasn't the artisanal avocado toast she was used to, but she had to admit it tasted far better. Later that morning, Martha announced they needed to make a supply run in town. Emily, eager for a change of scenery, volunteered to tag along. The town was small, with a single main street lined by mom and pop stores, a diner, and a hardware shop. As they parked in front of a general store, Martha introduced Emily to the locals, who greeted her with a mix of curiosity and kindness. "This is Betty Harper," Martha said, gesturing to a cheerful woman in her 60s who owned the local diner. "Nice to meet you, Emily," Betty said, her eyes twinkling. "I used to know your mother. Clara was a gem." The mention of her mother sparked a flicker of curiosity in Emily, but she pushed it aside for now. Inside the store, Emily noticed the stark contrast between her life in the city and the simplicity of this small-town community. People greeted each other by name, stopping to chat about the weather or the latest town events. It was a far cry from the hurried, impersonal interactions she was used to. After their errands, Martha suggested stopping by the diner for lunch. Emily hesitated but agreed. The interior was cozy, with checkered tablecloths and a faint smell of freshly brewed coffee. As they ate, they were joined by Luke Taylor, a single father who worked multiple jobs to support his young daughter, Sophie. Luke was polite but reserved, his piercing blue eyes observing Emily with quiet curiosity. Sophie, an adorable 8-year-old with pigtails, was far less shy. "Are you the fancy lady staying at the Carter farm?" she asked bluntly. Emily chuckled, nodding. "I suppose so." "Do you know how to ride a horse?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Not yet," Emily admitted. "I can teach you," Sophie exclaimed, bouncing in her seat. "Sophie," Luke interjected, his tone gentle but firm. "Don't bother Miss Carter." "She's not bothering me," Emily said quickly, surprising herself. That evening, Betty invited Emily to a local charity auction. Reluctant at first, Emily agreed after some coaxing from Martha. The event was held in the town hall, a modest but charming venue decorated with strings of twinkling lights. Emily felt out of place in her simple jeans and sweater, but the townsfolk welcomed her warmly. She observed as people bid on handmade quilts, baked goods, and antique furniture. The sense of community was palpable, and for the first time, Emily felt a pang of longing to belong to something similar. Betty leaned over and whispered, "Your mother loved events like this. She had a way of bringing people together." The words lingered with Emily as the evening progressed. Who was her mother, really? And why had her father kept her so distanced from this part of her family's history? Before they left, Betty handed Emily a small envelope. "Clara gave me this years ago. She told me to keep it safe in case her daughter ever came back to the farm." Emily's heart raced as she clutched the envelope. Once she was back at the farm, she retreated to her room and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note in delicate script. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to where you belong. This farm was my sanctuary, and I hope it becomes yours too. Look beyond what you see on the surface, and you'll find the answers you're searching for. Love, Mom." Tears blurred Emily's vision as she read the note over and over. Her mother had left her a breadcrumb trail, one that seemed to lead straight to the heart of the farm and its secrets. The next morning, Emily joined Martha in the fields. Her hands were still clumsy, and the physical labor was exhausting, but there was a growing sense of satisfaction in the work. Joe passed by, tipping his hat. "You're starting to look like you belong here," he teased. "Don't get used to it," Emily replied, though the corners of her mouth twitched upward. As the day wore on, Emily found herself drawn to the locked chest in her room again. Her mother's note had awakened something in her, a desire to understand, to piece together the fragments of the past that Richard Carter had kept hidden. That night, as the stars blanketed the Montana sky, Emily sat by the window, journaling her thoughts. The farm was slowly becoming more than just a punishment. It was a place where she could begin to unravel the truth, not just about her family, but about herself. The early morning air was crisp and filled with the hum of insects. Emily trudged towards the chicken coop, clutching a bucket of feed. It had been nearly 2 weeks since she arrived at the farm, and while she wouldn't admit it to Martha or Joe, the routine was beginning to grow on her. There was something grounding about starting the day with tangible tasks, tasks that didn't involve social climbing, extravagant purchases, or superficial conversations. Today's chore was cleaning the chicken coop, a task Martha assured her would build character. Emily wrinkled her nose at the smell as she stepped inside, shooing away a few curious hens. Armed with gloves and a pitchfork, she set to work, muttering under her breath about how ridiculous it all was. But as the minutes turned into an hour, she found a rhythm. The repetitive motion of scooping and sweeping felt oddly therapeutic. When she finally stepped back to survey her work, the coop looked, if not pristine, at least much cleaner than before. "Not bad, city girl," Joe said, leaning against the doorframe. His tone was teasing, but there was a note of approval in his voice. Emily wiped the sweat from her brow and shot him a look. "Careful, Joe." That almost sounded like a compliment. "Don't let it go to your head," he replied with a smirk, tipping his hat before walking off. Later that afternoon, Joe invited Emily to help with the day's harvest. It was backbreaking work, pulling weeds and collecting vegetables under the relentless sun. Emily's hands ached and dirt caked her nails, but she refused to quit. Joe, working beside her, finally broke the silence. "Why'd your dad send you here anyway?" Emily hesitated, debating whether to brush off the question with a sarcastic remark. But something about Joe's straightforward demeanor made her feel like she could be honest. "He thinks I need to learn responsibility," she admitted, plucking a stubborn carrot from the ground. "And maybe he's right." Joe glanced at her, surprised by her candor. "Well, at least you're not running back to New York yet." Emily shrugged. "Maybe I like the challenge." They worked in companionable silence for a while longer, and Emily found herself feeling lighter. For all his teasing, Joe had a way of making her feel seen, not as a spoiled socialite, but as someone capable of more. That evening, Emily sat on the porch with Martha, sipping sweet tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky blazed with hues of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of peace. "Not bad for your first harvest," Martha remarked, nodding towards the basket of vegetables they'd brought in. "Thanks," Emily said. "I didn't think I'd survive the first week, let alone actually enjoy this." Martha chuckled. "Funny how life works. Sometimes the things we resist the most are the things we need the most." Emily stared out at the fields, Martha's words resonating with her. "Do you think that's why my mom loved this place so much?" Martha's expression softened. "Clara had a way of seeing the beauty in simple things. She wanted you to have that too." Emily didn't respond, but her chest tightened at the thought. She still didn't fully understand her mother's connection to the farm, but she was beginning to see glimpses of it. That night, Emily pulled out a notebook she'd found in her room, a simple, unadorned journal with yellowed pages. She hadn't written anything by hand in years, preferring the instant gratification of social media. But as she put pen to paper, the words came easily. She wrote about the farm, the sounds, the smells, the way the sky stretched endlessly above her. She wrote about the people she'd met, Martha, Joe, Betty, and even Luke and Sophie. And for the first time, she wrote about herself, not as a caricature of privilege, but as someone searching for meaning. When she finished, she stared at the page, surprised by how much she'd shared. The act of writing felt cathartic, like she was peeling back layers she hadn't realized were there. The next morning, Emily decided to revisit the locked chest in her room. Armed with the small note from her mother, she knelt before it, running her fingers over the worn wood. There was something almost reverent about the way she approached it now, as if the chest held not just belongings, but answers. After searching the farmhouse, she found an old skeleton key in a drawer. Her heart pounded as she inserted it into the lock and turned it. The lid creaked open, revealing a trove of items: faded photographs, letters tied with ribbon, and a delicate locket. Emily picked up the locket first, opening it to reveal two tiny portraits, her mother and herself, as a baby. A lump formed in her throat as she traced the images with her thumb. The letters, written in her mother's elegant handwriting, spoke of her dreams for the farm and her hopes for Emily's future. One line stood out: "This farm is more than land and buildings. It's a foundation for growth, for family, for love. I hope one day you'll see that too." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she read. The farm wasn't just a punishment, it was a gift, one her mother had fought to preserve. As the days passed, Emily threw herself into the work with newfound determination. She still stumbled, still made mistakes, but each task felt like a step closer to understanding her mother's vision. Joe noticed the change. "You're not bad at this, you know," he said one afternoon as they repaired a fence. Emily smirked. "Careful, Joe." That almost sounded like another compliment. "Don't get used to it," he replied, though the smile on his face suggested otherwise. Emily began to see the farm through different eyes. The crops, the animals, the people. It all formed a delicate ecosystem, one that required care and respect. And as she worked, she felt a growing connection, not just to the land, but to her mother's memory. Each night, she wrote in her journal, documenting the lessons she was learning. And each morning, she woke with a sense of purpose that had eluded her in the city. The golden light of dawn poured through the window as Emily stretched in her bed, the routine of farm life already imprinted in her system. She had grown accustomed to waking early, the chirping birds and the distant hum of the tractor signaling the start of a new day. But today, an unshakable sense of curiosity gnawed at her. Her discovery of the chest had left her with more questions than answers, and the letters from her mother lingered in her thoughts. While helping Martha sort through old storage boxes in the barn, Emily found herself distracted by her own thoughts. The letters hinted at something more, a deeper connection between her mother and the farm. She couldn't ignore the growing feeling that the answers she sought were still hidden somewhere in this place. "What's on your mind, Emily?" Martha asked, brushing dust off an old wooden crate. "Just thinking about my mom," Emily admitted, hesitating before continuing. "Do you know much about her time here?" Martha paused, her face softening. "Your mother loved this farm. It wasn't just a piece of land to her. It was a dream. She wanted it to be a haven, a place where people could find peace." Emily frowned. "Then why did she leave? Why didn't my dad ever bring me here?" Martha's gaze darkened slightly, and she busied herself with the crate. "That's a story your father needs to tell you. But if you want to understand your mother, you might find more in the attic." "The attic?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Clara stored a lot of her personal things up there. It hasn't been touched in years," Martha said, handing her a key. "Just be careful. The past has a way of stirring up emotions." Later that afternoon, Emily climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Dust motes floated in the beams of sunlight, filtering through the small window. The air was thick with the smell of aged wood and forgotten memories. The attic was packed with trunks, boxes, and furniture draped in white sheets. Emily hesitated, feeling as though she were trespassing on something sacred. She pulled the first sheet away, revealing an ornate wooden rocking chair. Nearby, a stack of photo albums caught her eye. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, Emily opened the first album. The pages were filled with photos of her mother, young and radiant, surrounded by friends and family. One photo showed her mother standing by the barn, her arms around a younger Richard, both of them laughing. Flipping further, Emily found a letter tucked between the pages. Unfolding it carefully, she read, "To my dearest Emily, if you ever find yourself here, know that this farm was where I found my true self. I hope you'll find yours too. There's a reason your father kept you away, but I believe in your strength to uncover the truth. Always remember, you are stronger than you think. Love, Mom." Tears stung Emily's eyes as she clutched the letter to her chest. Her mother's words felt like a lifeline, a connection to a woman she barely remembered, but deeply longed to know. That evening, Emily composed an email to her father. The polite, detached tone she usually adopted was replaced by raw honesty. "Dad, I've found letters from Mom. I know she loved this farm and wanted me to be here. Why did you keep this place from me? Why did you let me believe it wasn't important? I need answers." She hit send and stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The next morning, Emily threw herself into the day's chores with renewed purpose. Joe noticed the shift in her demeanor as they worked side by side in the fields. "You've got a fire in you today," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Let's just say I've got something to prove," Emily replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. Joe chuckled. "About time. You're starting to look like a proper farmhand." As the hours passed, Emily found herself appreciating the physicality of the work. Each task, no matter how small, felt like a step toward understanding her mother's love for the farm. That night, Emily sat by the fireplace with Martha, the two women sipping tea in companionable silence. "I found another letter from my mom," Emily said quietly. Martha looked at her, waiting. "She said this farm helped her find herself. I think I'm starting to understand what she meant," Emily admitted. Martha reached over, squeezing Emily's hand. "Your mother would be proud of you, Emily. You're finding your own strength, just like she did." The next morning, Emily woke to a notification on her phone. Her father had replied, "Emily, there's so much you don't know, and I take responsibility for that. Your mother and I had different visions for our family, and it led to decisions I regret. I'll come to the farm soon, so we can talk in person. Love, Dad." Emily's stomach churned as she read his words. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew the conversation would be a turning point. As the sun set that evening, Emily sat by the stream that ran through the property, her journal balanced on her lap. She wrote about her discoveries, her mother's letters, and the growing connection she felt to the farm. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, not just for understanding her mother, but for redefining her own identity. The Emily Carter who had arrived at the farm weeks ago felt like a distant memory, replaced by someone stronger, more grounded, and more curious about the world around her. She closed her journal, the sound of the stream lulling her into a sense of calm. The secrets of the farm were beginning to unfold, and Emily was ready to face whatever came next. The early morning fog lingered over the fields as Emily made her way to the barn, her boots crunching softly on the gravel path. She had grown used to the rhythm of farm life, but today was different. Today, Martha had tasked her with a new responsibility, learning to operate the farm's aging tractor. Joe was already waiting by the tractor when Emily arrived, leaning against it with his trademark smirk. "Ready to tame this beast?" he asked, patting the rusty machine. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Is this your way of saying it's going to fall apart?" while I'm driving it?" Joe laughed. "Only if you don't listen to my instructions?" The lesson started with Joe demonstrating the controls, his voice steady and patient. Emily, however, felt her confidence waver as she climbed into the driver's seat. The steering wheel felt enormous, and the array of levers and pedals was overwhelming. "All right, give it a go," Joe said, stepping back. Emily hesitated before turning the key. The tractor roared to life, and she clutched the steering wheel tightly as it lurched forward. Her first attempt to maneuver the vehicle ended with a sudden jolt, the front wheel catching on a rock. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Joe shouted, running to her side. "You've got to ease into it, not wrestle it." Emily flushed with embarrassment, but nodded, determined to try again. After an hour of practice, Emily felt slightly more confident. She managed to navigate the field without any major mishaps, but her overconfidence led to disaster. While attempting a sharp turn, she accidentally pressed the wrong lever, causing the tractor to veer into a wooden fence. The loud crunch of breaking wood echoed through the air. Joe rushed over, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Are you serious?" he said, gesturing to the splintered fence. "Do you know how long it's going to take to fix this?" "I didn't mean to," Emily snapped, jumping down from the tractor. "That doesn't change the fact that you just caused a mess," Joe retorted. The tension between them crackled like a live wire. Emily's frustration boiled over, and she turned on her heel, storming back toward the house. Emily found Martha in the kitchen, preparing lunch. Without a word, she slumped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "Tough morning?" Martha asked, her voice calm. "Joe thinks I'm a walking disaster," Emily muttered. Martha set down her knife and joined Emily at the table. "You're not the first person to make mistakes, and you won't be the last. Joe's just particular about his work." Emily sighed. "I just wanted to prove that I could handle it. Now he probably thinks I don't belong here." Martha leaned forward, her eyes kind. "It's not about proving yourself to Joe or anyone else. It's about learning. Every mistake is an opportunity to grow, Emily. Don't let one bad day define your journey." That evening, Emily couldn't shake the weight of her failure. As the rest of the farm settled into quiet, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Grabbing a flashlight, she headed back to the barn. The tractor loomed in the dim light, and Emily climbed into the seat with renewed determination. She spent hours practicing, carefully navigating the field and testing the controls. Her hands grew calloused and her muscles ached, but she refused to quit. By the time the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon, Emily felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't known before. The next morning, Joe was already at the barn, inspecting the damaged fence. He looked up in surprise as Emily approached, her face smudged with dirt and exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I fixed the tractor," Emily said, her voice steady. "And I want to help repair the fence. I know I messed up, but I'm not giving up." Joe studied her for a moment before nodding. "All right, let's get to work." The two of them spent hours rebuilding the fence, their initial tension easing as they worked side by side. Joe's instructions were patient, and Emily found herself appreciating his attention to detail. When they finished, Joe stepped back and inspected their handiwork. "Not bad," he said, a hint of approval in his tone. "Thanks," Emily replied, feeling a small spark of pride. Over the next few days, Emily and Joe fell into a comfortable rhythm. They exchanged playful banter as they tackled various tasks, and Emily began to see a different side of him, one that was kind, supportive, and quietly encouraging. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the porch, Joe broke the silence. "You're tougher than I thought, city girl." Emily smiled, leaning back in her chair. And you're not as grumpy as I thought, farm boy. Joe chuckled, shaking his head. Don't let it go to your head. Emily's confidence grew with each passing day. She tackled new challenges with determination, from herding cattle to planting seeds. The work was hard, but it left her with a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced in her previous life. Martha noticed the change. You're starting to look like your mother, she said one morning as Emily prepared breakfast. Emily paused, her heart swelling at the comparison. Do you really think so? Martha nodded. She had the same fire in her, and she would have been proud to see you finding it. One evening, as Emily sat on the porch writing in her journal, she received an unexpected notification. It was an email from her father. Emily, I know I've been distant, and I regret not being more open with you. There's so much about your mother and the farm that I need to explain. I'll be arriving in a few days. Love, Dad. Emily stared at the message, her emotions swirling. The conversation she had been dreading was finally on the horizon. As the stars dotted the Montana sky, Emily reflected on her journey so far. She had faced failures, pushed through frustrations, and discovered a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. The farm was no longer just a punishment. It was a place of growth, a connection to her mother, and a mirror reflecting her potential. With her father's visit approaching, Emily knew the next chapter of her story would bring answers and likely more challenges. But for the first time, she felt ready to face them head-on. The warm light of dawn bathed the farm. As Emily stepped out of the main house, the scent of fresh dew mingling with the earthy aroma of soil. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the farm, but today felt different. Today she was determined to venture beyond its boundaries and learn more about the small-town community that seemed so tightly knit yet foreign to her. Martha had suggested Emily visit the town's community shelter, a modest building nestled near the heart of Main Street. As Emily parked her pickup truck, a vehicle she had learned to drive with much trial and error, she couldn't help but feel nervous. The shelter buzzed with activity. Volunteers unpacked food donations, sorted clothes, and greeted visitors with warm smiles. A middle-aged man with a kind face approached her. You must be Emily Carter, he said, extending a hand. I'm Pastor Mark Harris. Martha mentioned you might drop by. Emily shook his hand, his genuine warmth easing her nerves. I thought I'd see how I could help. Pastor Mark nodded approvingly. We could always use an extra set of hands. Let me show you around. Inside the shelter, Emily met a diverse group of volunteers, including retired school teachers, college students, and local business owners. One volunteer stood out, a young single father named Luke Taylor, who balanced sorting donations while keeping an eye on his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. Sophie's wide eyes lit up when she spotted Emily. You're the lady from the big farm. Emily smiled, crouching to Sophie's level. That's right. And you must be Sophie. The little girl giggled. Daddy says the farm is magical. Have you seen the fairy trees? Fairy trees? Emily asked, intrigued. They're not real, Luke interjected with a chuckle, joining the conversation. Sophie likes to imagine the old apple orchard has magic powers. Emily grinned. Sounds like I need to visit this orchard. Maybe Sophie can give me a tour someday. Sophie beamed, while Luke offered a quiet, grateful nod. Emily spent the day helping sort donations and serving meals. At first she felt out of place, her manicured nails and designer sneakers contrasting sharply with the worn but practical attire of the other volunteers. However, as the hours passed, she found herself engrossed in the work. Is this your first time volunteering? Pastor Mark asked, as they folded blankets together. First time doing anything like this? Emily admitted. Back in New York, My life revolved around, well, me. Mark nodded thoughtfully. It's never too late to start giving back. Everyone has something to offer, no matter where they come from. Emily considered his words, a flicker of pride stirring within her, as she realized how fulfilling the day had been. Before leaving the shelter, Pastor Mark invited Emily to attend the upcoming charity picnic, an annual event that raised funds for the shelter. It's nothing fancy, he said, but it's a great way to connect with the community. Emily hesitated. She still felt like an outsider, unsure if she truly belonged. But as she glanced at Sophie and Luke, who were busy organizing boxes of toys, she decided to accept. I'll be there, she said, earning a bright smile from Pastor Mark. Back at the farm, Emily shared her experience with Martha and Joe over dinner. You did good today, Martha said, her tone filled with pride. It's not easy stepping out of your comfort zone. Joe smirked. Bet you didn't think you'd spend your time here at a community shelter. Emily laughed. No, but it's surprisingly rewarding. I think I'm starting to understand why this place meant so much to my mother. As she lay in bed that night, Emily thought about the people she had met. Pastor Mark, Sophie, Luke, and the stories they carried. She felt a growing sense of purpose, as though her time on the farm was reshaping not just her perspective, but her very identity. The picnic was held in a wide open field on the edge of town, with colorful tents, picnic tables, and games for children. Families brought homemade dishes, and a local band played cheerful tunes. Emily arrived with Martha and Joe, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. She was greeted warmly by Pastor Mark, who introduced her to more townspeople. Emily, over here, Sophie called, tugging her father toward the dessert table. Emily joined them, helping Sophie choose a slice of pie, while Luke looked on with a smile. This is nice, Emily said, glancing around. It's one of the few times everyone in town comes together, Luke replied. We all pitch in to make it happen. As the day went on, Emily participated in games, sampled homemade treats, and even helped auction off a basket of farm-fresh produce. To her surprise, she felt a genuine connection to the people around her, a feeling she had rarely experienced in her former life. As the picnic drew to a close, dark clouds rolled in, and the distant rumble of thunder signaled an approaching storm. We'd better head back, Joe said, glancing at the sky. Emily nodded, but before they could leave, Sophie tugged at her hand. Miss Emily, will you come to the orchard with me? I want to show you the fairy trees. Emily hesitated, glancing at Luke, who smiled. Go ahead. I'll catch up. Following Sophie, Emily found herself in a grove of ancient apple trees. The little girl twirled around, pointing out knotted branches that resembled fairy doors. This is my favorite place, Sophie said. It's magic, don't you think? Emily knelt, looking Sophie in the eyes. It's beautiful. And you're right. It does feel magical. Their moment was interrupted by a sudden downpour. Emily scooped Sophie into her arms and ran back to the main field where Luke and Joe were waiting. The storm raged through the night, leaving a trail of damage in its wake. The next morning, Emily joined Martha, Joe, and a group of neighbors to assess the destruction. Part of the farm's barn roof had been torn off, and several fences were flattened. Despite the damage, Emily felt a surge of determination. We can fix this, she said, rallying the others. Together. She worked tirelessly, helping to clear debris, repair fences, and secure the damaged roof. For the first time, she felt like part of something bigger than herself, a community bound by resilience and mutual support. That evening, as the sun set over the farm, Emily sat on the porch with Luke and Sophie. Sophie had fallen asleep in her lap, clutching her handmade bracelet, a gift she had given Emily earlier in the day. "You've made quite an impression on her," Luke said softly. "She's an incredible kid," Emily replied, stroking Sophie's hair. Luke hesitated before speaking again. "You're not what I expected, Emily. When you first arrived, I thought, well, let's just say, I didn't expect to see you repairing fences and volunteering at shelters." Emily smiled. "I didn't expect it either. But this place has a way of changing people." Luke nodded, their eyes meeting in a moment of quiet understanding. As Emily lay in bed that night, she reflected on the day's events. The storm had been a reminder of life's unpredictability, but it had also shown her the strength of the community and her own resilience. For the first time, Emily felt like she belonged. She was no longer the spoiled city girl searching for meaning. She was part of something real, something meaningful. She picked up her journal and began to write. "I came here to escape, but I've found so much more. A purpose, a family, and maybe even a little magic in the fairy trees." The early morning air was crisp and still, as Emily prepared herself for what she knew would be one of the hardest days on the farm. Richard Carter, her father, was arriving today. She hadn't seen him since the heated argument back in New York, when he declared she was being sent to Montana. So much had changed since then. She had changed. But the thought of facing him, of demanding the truth about her mother and her family's past, left her feeling vulnerable. The sound of a car engine rumbling down the gravel road broke the morning silence. Emily stood on the porch of the main house, watching as her father's sleek black sedan came into view. The vehicle seemed out of place among the rustic surroundings, a stark reminder of the life she had left behind. Richard stepped out, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that contrasted sharply with the casual work clothes Emily now wore. His eyes scanned the farm before landing on his daughter. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Emily," Richard said, his tone neutral but guarded. "Dad," she replied, her voice firm. Martha emerged from the house, breaking the tension with a polite smile. "Mr. Carter, welcome. Would you like some coffee before you and Emily have your talk?" Richard shook his head, his attention focused entirely on his daughter. "No, thank you. Emily and I have a lot to discuss." They walked to the barn, where Emily felt they could talk privately. The familiar scent of hay and earth filled the space, grounding her as she faced her father. "I see you've adapted well," Richard began, gesturing to her dirt-streaked jeans and boots. "Adapted, yes, but not just to farm life," Emily replied, crossing her arms. "I've adapted to honesty, hard work, and reality. Things you never gave me in New York." Richard frowned. "I sent you here to learn discipline, Emily, not to attack me." "This isn't an attack, Dad. It's the truth," Emily shot back. "And speaking of truth, I need answers. Why did you hide so much about Mom? About this farm? About who we really are?" Richard stiffened, his composure faltering. "Emily, some things are better left in the past. Your mother—" "Don't," Emily interrupted, her voice trembling. "Don't brush this off. I deserve to know. Why did you cut me off from this place? From her legacy?" Richard sighed deeply, running a hand through his silver hair. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, a man burdened by guilt and secrets. "Your mother loved this farm," he began quietly. "She wanted to raise you here, to teach you about hard work, community, and humility. But I couldn't see it. I thought giving you everything, wealth, privilege, security, was the only way to ensure your future. And in doing so, you took me away from her values," Emily said, her voice softening but still firm. Richard nodded, his expression pained. "She tried to fight me on it, but I wouldn't listen. When she passed, I couldn't face this place, It reminded me of everything I had taken from her, and from you. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she absorbed his words. So, you ran. You buried yourself in your work and left me to grow up in a world of lies and materialism. Richard's voice cracked as he replied, I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now that I was wrong. Sending you here was my way of trying to make it right, even if it was too little, too late. Emily turned away, wiping her tears. The weight of her father's confession was both a relief and a new source of pain. She wanted to hate him for his choices, but she could see the regret etched in his face. I've changed, Dad, she said, after a long pause. This place has shown me what really matters. It's not the money or the parties. It's the people, the connections, and the values Mom wanted me to have. Richard stepped closer, his voice trembling. And I want to change too, Emily. But I need your help. I want to understand this place, your mother's vision, and you, if you'll let me. Emily studied him, searching for sincerity. For the first time in years, she saw not the powerful businessman, but the flawed and vulnerable father who wanted to make amends. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Martha calling from the house. Emily, Richard, we need your help. Rushing outside, they found Joe and several farmhands trying to corral a group of panicked cattle that had broken through a damaged fence. The animals were scattering across the field, and chaos reigned. Without hesitation, Emily sprang into action. Dad, grab that rope, she shouted, pointing to a coil hanging by the barn. Richard hesitated for a moment, but obeyed. Under Emily's direction, he joined Joe and the others in rounding up the cattle. Though clumsy and clearly out of his element, Richard didn't back down. When the last cow was secured, everyone gathered by the fence, sweaty and exhausted. Richard leaned against the post, his suit jacket long discarded. You did good, Mr. Carter, Joe said, surprising everyone with his rare praise. Richard gave a small, sheepish smile. Yes, I still have a lot to learn. That evening, the farm was quiet again. Emily and Richard sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge. For the first time, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than strained. You really are your mother's daughter, Richard said finally. Emily smiled, a hint of pride in her expression. And maybe you can be the father I needed too. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. I'll try, Emily. I promise. As Emily lay in bed that night, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. Her father's visit, though tumultuous, had brought the truth she had been seeking. More importantly, it had opened the door to healing, a chance to rebuild their fractured relationship and honor her mother's legacy. With the stars shining brightly outside her window, Emily whispered a silent vow to keep growing, to keep learning, and to make the farm a place her mother would be proud of. The air was crisp and cool as Emily stepped out of the house early in the morning, the first rays of sunlight illuminating the rolling fields of the farm. The events of the past few days with her father lingered in her mind, but today felt like a new chapter. It was time to dig deeper into her mother's legacy, to uncover what Clara Carter had envisioned for this farm and her family. Emily decided to spend the morning sorting through the old documents and items stored in the attic. Armed with a flashlight and a journal to jot down notes, she ascended the creaky staircase. Dust particles danced in the beams of sunlight, filtering through the small window, and the scent of aged wood filled the air. Among the boxes, she found an old ledger filled with Clara's handwriting. It detailed ideas and plans for transforming the farm into a sanctuary, not just for the Carter family, but for others in need. One entry stood out. This farm is not just land. It's a place for healing, for growth, for finding oneself. I hope Emily will one day understand the true value of what we have here. Emily's breath hitched as she read her mother's words. It was as though Clara had written them directly to her. During breakfast, Emily shared her discovery with Martha and Joe. Mom wanted this place to be more than a farm, Emily said, her voice filled with determination. She dreamed of it being a sanctuary, a place where people could come to heal and grow. I want to make that happen. Martha smiled warmly. Your mother had a beautiful vision. It won't be easy, but if anyone can bring it to life, it's you. Joe, ever practical, nodded. You'll need a plan, funding, and community support, but it's worth pursuing. To gather ideas, Emily spent the next few days visiting local farms and talking to their owners. She learned about sustainable practices, community-supported agriculture, and educational workshops for children. Each visit deepened her understanding of what was possible and strengthened her resolve. She also sought advice from Pastor Mark, who encouraged her to involve the townspeople. The more people feel invested in this project, the more likely it is to succeed, he said. Emily decided to host a town meeting at the farm to present her idea. She spent hours crafting her proposal, balancing Clara's original vision with her own modern twist. On the day of the meeting, she stood in the barn-turned-community hall, her heart pounding as neighbors and friends filled the space. Richard stood in the back, watching with a mixture of pride and apprehension. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. This farm has always been a part of our community, but it can be so much more. My mother dreamed of making it a place of healing and growth. I want to build on that dream by creating a sanctuary for families, children, and anyone seeking a fresh start. She detailed her plans for workshops, volunteer programs, and partnerships with local organizations. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. With the town's support, Emily set to work. She and Richard began outlining the logistics, drawing from his business expertise and her newfound determination. Your mother would be proud, Richard said one evening, as they worked late into the night. Emily smiled. I just want to honor her and make this place meaningful for everyone. Joe and Martha rallied the farmhands, while Pastor Mark coordinated volunteers. Even Sophie and Luke pitched in, helping to paint signs and organize materials. To symbolize the farm's new beginning, Emily decided to plant a tree in Clara's memory. The entire town gathered for the event, each person contributing a handful of soil. As the tree stood tall in its new home, Emily felt a profound sense of connection, not just to her mother, but to the community that had embraced her. That night, Emily wrote in her journal, Today, I felt Mom's presence more than ever. This farm is her legacy, but it's also mine now. Together, we're creating something that will last far beyond us. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. There were disagreements over funding, setbacks with construction, and moments of doubt. But Emily faced each challenge head-on, her determination unwavering. One particularly tough day, Luke found her sitting by the fairy trees, her head in her hands. Need a break? He asked, sitting beside her. Emily sighed. It feels like every step forward comes with 2 steps back. Luke placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Change is hard, but it's worth it. Look at what you've already accomplished. His words gave her the strength to keep going. As Emily's relationship with the town deepened, so did her bond with Luke and Sophie. They became her constant supporters, offering laughter and encouragement on even the hardest days. One evening, as they sat by a campfire, Luke opened up about his own struggles as a single father. You've inspired me, Emily, he said. to dream bigger, to believe in second chances. She smiled, feeling the warmth of their connection. The golden hues of sunrise painted the Montana sky. As Emily stepped onto the porch, a cup of steaming coffee in hand, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and dew-covered grass. It was a moment of peace, but Emily's thoughts were anything but calm. Today, she would confront the betrayal that had haunted her since leaving New York. Emily's phone buzzed on the kitchen table, the sound breaking the stillness of the morning. It was Henry Evans, her lawyer and trusted confidant. She had been waiting for this call for weeks, dreading the confirmation she knew was coming. "Emily," Henry began, his voice steady but grim. "I have the results of my investigation." Emily set her coffee down, gripping the phone tightly. "Tell me everything." Henry explained that Samantha Price, Emily's closest friend back in New York, had indeed been conspiring against her. Bank records, forged contracts, and correspondence revealed Samantha's elaborate scheme to siphon funds from Emily's trust. But it didn't stop there. Several other so-called friends were involved, each playing their part in the betrayal. Emily's heart sank as Henry listed the names, people she had shared laughs with, confided in, and trusted implicitly. "I can't believe this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Emily," Henry said. "But now that we have evidence, we can take legal action. Do you want me to proceed?" "Yes," she replied firmly. No more looking the other way. After ending the call, Emily sat at the kitchen table, her mind racing. The betrayal was worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just Samantha. It was a web of deceit, spun by nearly everyone she had once considered a friend. Martha entered the kitchen, her expression softening when she saw Emily's face. "Bad news?" Emily nodded, explaining the situation. Martha listened quietly, her weathered hands resting on the table. "Betrayal cuts deep," Martha said when Emily finished. "But it also teaches you who truly matters." Emily looked at the older woman, her words sinking in. For the first time, she realized how much she had gained since coming to the farm. A sense of purpose, true friends, and a connection to her mother's legacy. Determined to reclaim control of her life, Emily spent the next few days working with Henry on her legal case. She reviewed documents, signed affidavits, and authorized the freezing of accounts tied to Samantha and her co-conspirators. Meanwhile, Richard offered his support in ways Emily never expected. "If you need resources, lawyers, financial advisors, just say the word," he said one evening as they reviewed the case together. Emily hesitated, still adjusting to this new version of her father. "Thank you, Dad, but I think I've got it under control." Richard smiled. "I'm proud of you, Emily. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." The day Emily confronted Samantha was both cathartic and painful. She flew back to New York, for the first time since leaving, the city's skyscrapers looming like distant memories of a life she no longer recognized. They met in a sleek downtown office, Henry by Emily's side, and Samantha visibly shaken. "Emily, this is a misunderstanding," Samantha began, her voice faltering. "You know I'd never hurt you." "Stop," Emily said, her tone icy. "I've seen the evidence. I know what you did." Samantha's facade crumbled, and she began to plead, tears streaming down her face. But Emily stood firm, refusing to let emotion sway her. "This isn't just about the money," Emily said. "It's about trust. You used me, and I won't let you get away with it." By the end of the meeting, Samantha had agreed to a settlement, though Emily knew the damage to their friendship was irreparable. Back at the farm, Emily felt a wave of relief as the Montana sky stretched out before her. She had faced the ghosts of her past and emerged stronger. Joe greeted her as she stepped out of the truck. "How'd it go?" he asked, his voice gruff but tinged with concern. "It's done," Emily replied, "and I'm ready to move on." Joe nodded, a rare smile breaking across his face. "Good. We've got work to do." With the betrayal behind her, Emily focused her energy on the farm and the sanctuary project. She threw herself into planning workshops, organizing community events, and strengthening relationships with the people who had become her second family. Richard, too, worked to rebuild trust, not just with Emily, but with the community. He spent his days repairing fences, planting crops, and learning the rhythms of farm life. "You're not half bad at this," Joe remarked one afternoon, as Richard successfully wrangled a stray calf. "High praise coming from you," Richard replied with a chuckle. The farm's transformation into a sanctuary was well underway. Volunteers from the town helped construct a community garden, while local artisans contributed to a learning center for children. Emily's vision was coming to life, and the farm buzzed with activity and hope. One evening, as Emily watched the sunset with Luke and Sophie, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. "You've done something amazing here," Luke said, his eyes warm. "We've done it together," Emily replied, reaching for Sophie's hand. Emily knew there would always be challenges, but she was no longer afraid of them. The betrayal she had faced had taught her resilience, and the farm had given her a foundation to build on. As she stood beneath the tree planted in her mother's memory, Emily whispered, "I'm finally free." The morning sunlight poured over the fields of the farm, casting long shadows that danced with the rhythm of the wind. Emily stood near the barn, her hands covered in dirt from an early start in the garden. Despite the physical labor, there was a lightness in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known before arriving here, a sense of purpose. But today was about more than the farm. It was about rebuilding trust, both with her father and the community that had become her family. Richard Carter had changed. Emily could see it in the way he carried himself, no longer the confident tycoon commanding boardrooms, but a man humbled by the simplicity of farm life. He was learning slowly but surely, and Emily had started to let down her guard. Over breakfast, Richard broached a subject they had avoided for weeks. "Emily," he began, stirring his coffee, "I've been thinking about how much I've missed. I want to make things right, not just with you, but with everyone." Emily set her fork down, studying him. "What brought this on?" He hesitated. "The truth is, seeing you here, how much you've grown, how much you've done, I realized how wrong I was. I see what your mother saw in this place, and I want to help." The sincerity in his voice caught Emily off guard. "If you're serious," she said, "then it starts with action, not words." That afternoon, Richard joined Emily and Joe in repairing the fences on the south side of the property. It was grueling work under the relentless sun, but Richard didn't complain. He listened as Joe explained the technique, his hands fumbling with the tools, but his determination unwavering. "You're not too bad at this, Mr. Carter," Joe said, his tone teasing but kind. Richard chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Coming from you, I'll take that as high praise." Emily watched from a distance, a small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time, she felt hope that her father might truly change. The sanctuary project was gaining momentum. Emily worked tirelessly to organize workshops and events that would bring the community together. With Martha's help, she reached out to local leaders, inviting them to contribute their expertise. The response was overwhelmingly positive. One evening, Emily gathered with her core team, Joe, Martha, Pastor Mark, and Luke, to finalize plans for the upcoming open house event. The goal was to showcase the farm's transformation and encourage more involvement. I've also been thinking about adding an educational component, Emily said, flipping through her notebook. Workshops on sustainable farming, cooking classes using local produce, things that can benefit the entire town. Luke nodded. It's a great idea. People here want to learn, and this farm is becoming the heart of the community. Richard made an effort to connect with the townspeople, something he had never done before. At the local diner, he struck up conversations with farmers and shopkeepers, listening to their stories and concerns. At first, they were wary of the city businessman, but his humility began to win them over. Betty Harper, the diner owner, was one of the first to soften. "You're not what I expected," she said over a cup of coffee. "Most people with your kind of money don't care about folks like us." "I used to be that way," Richard admitted. "But my daughter is teaching me there's more to life than money." Betty smiled. "You raised a good one." Not everything was smooth sailing. As the farm's profile grew, so did the scrutiny. Some townspeople questioned Emily's motives, suspecting she might eventually sell the land to developers. Others resented the attention the Carters were receiving, feeling their own struggles were being overshadowed. One evening, Emily found herself in a tense meeting at the town hall. A vocal critic, Gerald Hayes, accused her of exploiting the community for personal gain. "You waltzed in here with your fancy ideas and big city money," he said, his voice sharp. "But what happens when you get bored and leave? We'll be stuck picking up the pieces." Emily took a deep breath before responding. "I understand your concerns, Gerald, but I'm not here to take anything from this community. I'm here to give back. This farm isn't just my mother's legacy. It's ours." Her sincerity silenced the room, but the doubt lingered in Gerald's eyes. Determined to prove her commitment, Emily invited Gerald to the farm, offering him a role in the sanctuary project. Reluctantly, he agreed. Over the following weeks, he became one of her most vocal supporters, his skepticism replaced by admiration. "You're not half bad for a city girl," he said one day, a rare smile on his face. "Don't let Joe hear you say that," Emily replied with a laugh. "He might start expecting miracles." As the farm flourished, so did Emily's relationships. Her bond with Luke deepened, their shared moments filled with quiet understanding and unspoken affection. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat beneath the stars, the cool night air wrapping around them. "You've changed, you know," Luke said, his voice soft. "So have you," Emily replied, her gaze locked on the sky. "This place changes everyone." Sophie ran out of the house, carrying a blanket. "Don't forget about me," she called, her laughter filling the night. Emily smiled, pulling Sophie close. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known in New York. The day of the open house arrived, and the farm buzzed with activity. Volunteers set up booths, children played in the fields, and the scent of fresh-baked pies wafted through the air. Emily stood by the barn, her heart swelling with pride, as she watched the community come together. Richard approached, a rare smile on his face. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Emily." "She'd be proud of all of us," Emily replied. As the sun set and lanterns lit up the farm, Emily stood beneath the tree planted in Clara's memory, surrounded by friends and family. For the first time in her life, she felt truly at peace. The farm was alive with anticipation, as Emily and her team prepared for the largest fundraiser the town had ever seen. The air buzzed with the chatter of volunteers, setting up booths, arranging decorations, and preparing homemade goods to sell. The event wasn't just about raising funds. It was about restoring the heart of the community. Emily spent the week, leading up to the event, reaching out to every corner of the town, personally inviting families, business owners, and even those who had been skeptical of her intentions. At Betty Harper's diner, Emily handed a flyer to a group of older patrons. "We'd love to see you there. Bring your families. It's going to be a wonderful day." Betty gave her an approving nod. "You've got a knack for bringing people together, Emily. Clara would be proud." Emily smiled, feeling a surge of warmth. She thought of her mother often these days, finding strength in the vision Clara had left behind. The sun rose on the day of the event, casting a golden glow over the farm. Emily woke early, her heart racing with both excitement and nerves. Outside, the scene was already bustling. Joe was overseeing the setup of the auction items, Martha was directing volunteers, and Richard was helping to assemble a stage for the evening's performances. "Emily!" Sophie's voice rang out as she ran across the yard, holding a bundle of wildflowers. "These are for the welcome table." "They're perfect, Sophie," Emily said, crouching down to admire the colorful bouquet. Luke appeared behind his daughter, his smile warm. "She's been picking them since dawn. Said they'd make everyone feel at home." "They will," Emily replied, her gaze lingering on Luke for a moment longer than she intended. By midday, the farm was teeming with visitors. Booths lined the main pathway, offering everything from fresh produce and baked goods to handmade crafts and local artwork. Children laughed as they ran through the fields, and the sound of a bluegrass band filled the air. Emily moved through the crowd, greeting guests and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Gerald Hayes, once her most vocal critic, manned a booth showcasing historical artifacts from the town's early days. "Didn't think I'd see the day when you'd be part of this," Emily said, a teasing lilt in her voice. Gerald chuckled. "You won me over, Carter. But don't let it go to your head." As the day unfolded, Emily found herself standing near the barn, taking in the sight of the community coming together. Richard approached, a rare softness in his expression. "You've done something remarkable here, Emily," he said. "I see now why Clara loved this place so much." Emily turned to him, her eyes glistening. "It's not just me, Dad. It's everyone. This farm isn't just ours. It belongs to the whole town." Richard nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be proud. I'm proud too." The highlight of the day was the charity auction, held under a large tent near the barn. Joe served as the auctioneer, his booming voice adding humor and excitement to the proceedings. Items ranged from handmade quilts to a week's worth of farm-fresh eggs, donated by locals. But the biggest draw was a painting Emily had discovered in the attic, a portrait of Clara surrounded by the fields she loved. "This piece," Joe announced, "is not just a work of art. It's a symbol of everything this farm stands for." The bidding was fierce, and the portrait eventually sold to Betty Harper, who announced she planned to display it in her diner. The crowd erupted in applause, the spirit of unity palpable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily took the stage to thank everyone for their support. Lanterns illuminated the crowd, casting a warm glow that mirrored the feeling in her heart. "Today isn't just about raising funds," Emily began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's about honoring the legacy of this farm and the values it represents: hard work, community, and love. Thank you for being part of this journey." The crowd cheered, their applause echoing through the night. After the event wound down, Emily found herself walking along the edge of the field. The quiet night, a stark contrast to the day's energy. Luke appeared beside her, his presence grounding. "You did it," he said softly. "You brought everyone together." "I didn't do it alone," Emily replied. "This place has a way of working its magic." They walked in silence for a moment, before Luke stopped, turning to face her. "You're part of that magic, Emily." The sincerity in his voice took her breath away. Under the canopy of stars, Their connection deepened, and when Luke leaned in, Emily didn't pull away. Their first kiss was gentle but full of unspoken promises. As the night stretched on, Emily returned to the farmhouse, her heart full. She joined Richard and Martha on the porch, the three of them basking in the success of the day. "We did something special today," Emily said, her voice quiet but resolute. Martha nodded. "You've given this town hope, Emily, and that's worth more than anything." Richard placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "This is just the beginning. Clara's dream is alive again, and it's all because of you." Emily looked out over the farm, the moonlight casting everything in a silver glow. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from material success, but from the bonds she had built and the lives she had touched. The following weeks brought a renewed sense of purpose to Emily Carter and everyone connected to the farm. The success of the fundraiser not only secured the resources to restore the farm, but also reignited the community's faith in its future. Yet for Emily, it marked the beginning of something larger, an opportunity to carry her mother Clara's legacy into a new era. One crisp morning, Emily sat with Richard and Martha at the kitchen table, her journal open to a page filled with sketches and notes. "I've been thinking about what we can do next," Emily began, tapping her pen on the page. "The fundraiser was a success, but it's just the start. What if we create something that combines Mom's dream with the needs of the town?" Richard leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "A foundation," Emily said, her voice growing more confident. "The Clara Carter Foundation. It would focus on three things: supporting sustainable farming, providing educational programs for the community, and offering sanctuary for families in need." Martha nodded slowly, her eyes brightening. "That sounds like exactly what Clara would have wanted, but it's a big undertaking." "I know," Emily replied, "but I've learned that big things can only happen with small steps, and we're not doing this alone." To turn her vision into reality, Emily reached out to the people who had supported her from the start. Joe agreed to oversee the agricultural programs, using his deep knowledge of the land to teach sustainable practices. Pastor Mark offered to run workshops on financial literacy and community building, while Betty Harper volunteered to host events at the diner to raise awareness. One afternoon, Emily stood before a group of volunteers in the barn. "This isn't just about the farm anymore," she said. "It's about creating something that lasts, a legacy we can all be proud of." The applause that followed was loud and heartfelt, a testament to the trust Emily had earned. Emily also dove into the history of the farm, uncovering old documents and photographs that revealed Clara's original plans. With Richard's help, she pieced together a narrative that tied the farm's story to the town's history. One day, while sorting through a stack of papers in the attic, Richard found a letter Clara had written but never sent. He handed it to Emily with a solemn expression. "I think this is for you." Emily unfolded the letter, her heart pounding. Clara's words leapt off the page, filled with love and hope for the family she had left behind. The letter ended with a simple plea: "Never forget the power of this land to heal and unite." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she read. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew this place could be something more." The formal launch of the Clara Carter Foundation became the farm's next milestone. Emily worked tirelessly to prepare, balancing her duties on the farm with meetings in town and late-night strategy sessions with Richard. "We'll host the launch here," Emily said during one of these sessions. "It should feel personal, something that reflects the heart of the farm." The planning came together quickly. Locals donated their time and resources to make the event special, from hand-painted signs to homemade dishes for the reception. The farm transformed into a welcoming space, its charm amplified by the community's love and care. The day of the launch dawned bright and clear. Guests began arriving early, their excitement palpable. The event brought together an eclectic mix of townspeople, regional leaders, and even a few journalists curious about the farm's story. Emily stood on the stage as the crowd gathered, her heart racing. She glanced at Richard, who gave her an encouraging nod, and then at Luke, standing near the back, with Sophie perched on his shoulders. Taking a deep breath, Emily began. Today is not just about the Carter family or this farm. It's about what we can accomplish when we come together. My mother believed in the power of this land to bring people together, and I'm honored to continue her work. She unveiled a plaque bearing the foundation's name and mission statement, drawing a standing ovation from the crowd. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the farm was quiet again, Emily walked to the tree planted in Clara's memory. Richard joined her, his hands in his pockets. "You've done something extraordinary," he said. "Your mother would have been so proud." Emily smiled, resting her hand on the tree's rough bark. "I finally feel like I understand her. And you, Dad? I'm glad you're part of this." Richard's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm grateful you gave me the chance." As the foundation's work began, the farm became a hub of activity. Joe led workshops on crop rotation and soil health, while Martha taught young families how to preserve food and manage household budgets. Emily partnered with local schools to create field trips that introduced children to the joys of farm life. One afternoon, Emily and Luke stood near the barn, watching a group of children plant seeds in a new community garden. "They're going to remember this," Luke said. "What you're doing here, it's going to change lives." Emily turned to him, her smile radiant. "It's not just me. It's all of us." As the sun set, casting the fields in golden light, Luke took Emily's hand. "You've changed everything for me, Emily," he said softly. "Not just this farm or this town, but me." Emily's heart raced as she looked into his eyes. "You've changed me too, Luke." Their kiss under the fading light was tender, but filled with the promise of a future together. The Clara Carter Foundation was no longer just an idea. It was a thriving reality. The farm had transformed into a hub of activity, brimming with life and energy. For Emily, every day felt like a new chapter in a story she was proud to write, a story her mother had begun, but never finished. The farm wasn't just a place. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and transformation. Emily woke before dawn, her morning routine now a far cry from her life in New York. She loved the quiet hours when the world was still wrapped in mist. Stepping onto the porch, she watched as the first rays of sunlight painted the fields in hues of gold. The barn was bustling with activity as Joe and the farmhands prepared for the day. "Morning, boss," Joe greeted with a wry smile. "Ready to get your hands dirty?" Emily laughed. "Always. What's on the agenda?" "Community workshop on sustainable irrigation," Joe replied. "And you've got a meeting with the foundation's board after that." Emily nodded, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. The foundation was growing faster than she'd imagined, thanks to the collective efforts of the community and her father's unwavering support. Richard had fully embraced his role at the farm. His transformation was evident in the calluses on his hands and the easy way he moved through the fields, a stark contrast to the polished businessman he once was. That afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing a fence, Richard turned to Emily. "You know, I never thought I'd find peace in a place like this, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Emily smiled. Mom always knew this farm had something special. I think she'd be proud of us. Richard paused, his expression thoughtful. She would. And she'd be prouder of you. You've taken her dream and made it your own. The farm's impact rippled through the town. Families who had once struggled now had access to resources and support. Children learned to plant gardens. Seniors found purpose in mentoring younger generations. And the foundation's workshops brought people together in ways no one had expected. One Saturday, the farm hosted its first annual harvest festival. The air was filled with the scent of fresh-baked pies and roasted corn, while laughter and music echoed across the fields. Emily moved through the crowd, greeting familiar faces and soaking in the joy around her. "Emily," Sophie called, running up with a basket of apples. "Look what we picked." "They're beautiful," Emily said, crouching to admire the bright red fruit. "You've got a real talent, Sophie." Luke appeared beside his daughter, his eyes warm. "She takes after her teacher." Emily blushed, the connection between them undeniable. As the festival wound down and the stars began to twinkle above, Luke led Emily to a quiet spot beneath Clara's tree. The moment felt heavy with meaning, the air thick with anticipation. "Emily," Luke began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've watched you transform this farm, this town, and yourself. You've shown me what it means to truly live." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. "I want to build a life with you here, where everything feels right. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Luke. 1,000 times. Yes." Under the canopy of stars, they sealed their future with a kiss, their love rooted as deeply as the tree above them. The following week, the foundation held a dedication ceremony for a new wing of the farm's community center, named in Clara Carter's honor. Emily stood before the crowd, her heart pounding as she prepared to speak. "This farm was my mother's dream," she began, her voice steady. "But it's become so much more. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together. My mother believed in the power of this land to heal and unite. And today, we honor her legacy by continuing that work." The crowd erupted in applause as the ribbon was cut, marking the official opening of the Clara Carter Community Center. That evening, Emily sat with Richard on the porch, watching the moon rise over the fields. The farm was quiet, the day's celebrations a pleasant memory. "You've done something extraordinary here, Emily," Richard said. "Your mother would be so proud." Emily turned to him, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad, or this community. It's all of us together." Richard nodded, his expression softening. "You've taught me more than I ever taught you, and for that, I'm grateful." In the months that followed, the Clara Carter Foundation expanded its reach. New partnerships with nearby towns allowed more families to benefit from its programs, and Emily's vision continued to grow. One day, as she stood at the edge of the fields, watching the workers plant seeds for the next season, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. The spoiled girl who had arrived at the farm months ago was gone, replaced by a woman who understood the value of hard work, community, and love. Years later, the farm had become a beacon of hope and progress. The foundation's programs were celebrated nationally, and Emily's work earned her recognition as a leader in sustainable farming and community development. Under Clara's tree, Emily and Luke stood with their children, the farm stretching out before them. The fields were lush, the barn bustling, and the farmhouse alive with laughter. "This is what she would have wanted," Emily said softly, her hand resting on Luke's. "She'd be proud," Luke replied, "just like we are of you." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily smiled, knowing the legacy she had built was more than she'd ever dreamed. The farm was no longer just a place. It was a home, a haven, and a promise for the future. Journey of Transformation shows us life has a way of leading us to places we never expected, helping us find who we truly are. What would you do if you had to leave everything you knew behind to rediscover yourself? Have you ever found purpose in the most unexpected places? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share your story. And if this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's so much more to come, including tales of redemption, resilience, and the human spirit. You won't want to miss the next chapter of inspiration. Thank you for being part of our journey. See you in the next story.